The name of my piece is Movimiento Elusivo, Jugando con la Naturaleza, which means elusive movements, playing with nature. And I chose this name because various reasons. And one of the reasons is the elusive part of it. I mean, elusive itself is kind of difficult to grasp and retain and explain. And I felt like it was fitting for my piece because I pull from so many different places, from my dreams, from visiting my grandmother's house, from my interest in sacred geometry, and also my interest in going outside and playing with the nature, which is why I named it the Playing with Nature. And then movement, for obvious reasons. My piece, it's really kinetic and it moves and it opens in different ways, and it's very sculptural. So I felt like it was really fitting to have this word for this piece, given that there's so many components that really bring it together. When I was younger, that I would go visit my grandma at her house in Mexico, there was so many insects, she had so many plants, and I was really curious to explore her house because I didn't grow up with her. So I was like, you know what, I just want to see what her house is like, what I can find. Like, there was a lot of old tools, like those irons that you couldn't even, like, you would have to heat them up and then iron, like. And so I started like digging in her garden, and she would just have all these things. Then I started noticing all the bugs that she had, and I started noticing these shapes, the sacred geometry. So I was like, what? And that's when I kind of really paid attention to more of like the shapes that naturally are created in nature. So sacred geometry is literally shapes that are found in nature. The reason why it's called sacred is because the origins of when it was used back in the religious Renaissance times with churches and art. And throughout the ages and centuries now, we use it in a very different way. However, it's still basic shapes put together to make complex things. For example, the basic ones could be the triangle, the circle, and this the square. And so for me, I like to go out to nature and see how these basic shapes play out in nature, like in leaves and flowers and so on. And I really like playing with those shapes, and so that's why I really wanted to use sacred geometry in my art, and that's why my piece is a hexagon shape. So when I'm getting ready to create the illustrations, I do various things. One, I have some books to reference that are like, what's his name? Ernst Haeckel, and obviously his drawings are very intricate and everything like that, right? So I'll look at those. I have other books on bugs or plants or whatever I'm trying to get at, and I just kind of skim through them, and then there's something that catches my eye and I stop there and I look at it and I kind of just pull from there. Sometimes I pull, like, maybe for example there's like a circular drawing that has certain things.
I'll take certain elements from that specific drawing and I apply it. Or sometimes I'll and then or I'll try to kind of like mimic that same form that is in nature, but then I tweak it a little bit. And then or sometimes I'll look out the window and then I see a hummingbird, and then for whatever reason the hummingbird reminds me of a certain bug, and then so it's kind of like just kind of going with the flow and being open to whatever your creative brain centers are telling me to use. And or sometimes when I'm looking through these books and I don't really find anything that really appeals to me, I just start doodling, and then once I finish the doodle, I start just drawing. I just start creating specific shapes around it, or start to draw with my left hand, which can sometimes it doesn't always draw right, but it sometimes creates other shapes that I guess my right hand couldn't do. And then I just kind of put it all together. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to use this one for this one, and this one looks cool with this one, and I like this one because of this reason. And then when it comes to the microscopic part of what the bigger one is, I also try to make them match so that they look like they belong together. So these drawings that I've drawn inside of each of them, I call them little triangle pockets. So the general idea behind all of them wasn't so much to talk about one particular insect per se, but of almost like the different anatomical parts of the insect life. They're each a pair. There's 2 drawings per little triangle pocket, and each drawing is connected to itself. So the one that is the one that's on the square, on the bottom part on the square, that one is more of like a microscopic, like if you were to look at a particular part of it under a microscope. And then the part that folds over, like creates the triangle, the roof part, that would be where the little microscopic zoomed in comes from. So it's like zooming in into a little piece of that. And for some of the drawings, they are actual drawings of like a bug that is like a real thing. And the other one, there's some that I did a combination of where I sometimes look at like different bugs or different plants, and I try to combine both of them together so that it creates kind of like a hybrid of some sort. So for the one that looks almost like a pink asparagus in a way, that one is like a combination of a drawing that I saw in a book that I then took a piece of that drawing of insect or plant life, and then I added my own color to it, and I made almost like little hair follicles coming out of it, as if it were to be a bug that almost like, I don't know how you call it, but it like retracts and expands as it like moves around. And then the base of it that looks like almost a leaf with tentacles, that would be like if you were to really zoom in to one of those hair particles of the top one, what it would look like. Just kind of like for us, our cells are so complex. When you go to the human cell, there's layers and layers and layers, like it goes for infinity. It's kind of the same concept with these drawings, where there's the bigger picture and then the zooming in part of that piece. So I wanted to include a bumblebee because I have a love for bees and bumblebees and all that. So I found the bee as I was walking outside of my house, and I wanted to use it, and I picked it up and I pinned it, but this was like about a year ago. And then as I was getting ready to work on this project again, I laid out all of the different drawings, and I was thinking like where I should apply it, because I don't have it all figured out before I put it all together in terms of like what's the drawing or what's going to be the bugs that I pin to it or anything like that. But this one in particular, at the bottom, it has a drawing of what to me looks like and reminds me of larvae that are growing as if they're being nested. And on the roof part, it has a drawing of a bee, but it's an abstract bee because I used my own colors and I made it like pink and green and things like dots of yellow, and I haven't seen a bee like that. But so I wanted to play with that, like give it different colors, and it just felt appropriate. When I was doing this, I didn't know what bug I was going to put in there, but when I found the bug and I was thinking about this project again, it made sense to put both of those together and combine them. When I dream, sometimes I speak other languages that I don't know. They could be, some people could call them alien languages if they were to hear them. And so then when I wake up from those dreams, I find it interesting. And so I'm like, okay, maybe it's the insects speaking to me, and I need to bring them into my art. So then on each of the drawings, I draw or I write the different languages. And so that process is, as I'm writing it out, I hear it in my head, and then I just draw according to however my hand wants to move, according to the rhythm. It's an interesting process that goes between like the connection of your brain to your hands, not just because of the language, but also like as an artist, when you're drawing, you're almost telling your hand what to do. And so in this way, the language is telling my hand how to write, and I just go based on that. So I'll sometimes draw from right to left, the left to right, up, down, or down, up. There's not just one way like I draw. I started doing bookbinding when I was in school after taking installation class with one of my teachers. She saw the work that I was doing that was based on like big installations or wall installations or ceiling installations, and she saw like I like a lot of intricacy stuff or work. And so she kept telling me for 2 semesters, you should take this bookbinding class. And I was like, I don't know, because you have to like cut everything so perfect. And then she told me again the second semester, and I was like, okay, fine, I'm gonna take it. So then I took it, and I saw the potential of where I could go with it, especially when thinking in terms of when you graduate from school, what kind of space can you work with? So when I was in this installation class, I was working with clay, I was working with jewelry making, I was doing a bunch of stuff. And in actuality, I was thinking, okay, once I graduate, how true can I have those things in my house, right? With bookbinding, I found that I could have it because it's paper and glue and your common supplies of paint and so on. And that's when I really was like, wow, like I can do so much with this. And I started, you learn the basics, how to do the bookbinding and stuff like that. And then when the teacher was, okay, now you're gonna have your final and these are the requirements, that's when I was, okay, I want to do something that's not just a normal book. And having been a sculpture major, I really wanted to combine both of the things. And I like sacred geometry, so I really wanted to kind of just take those 3 things and kind of mesh them together and see whatever came up. Well, it first starts with what shape do I want to use? In this case, it's the hexagon shape. And I was, okay, how can I use this shape and bring it into a 3D form and have it open up? And I liked the way that this one opens up, because it almost creates this effect of like a spiral, which again goes back to sacred geometry, Fibonacci, and all that stuff. And so then from there, the material that's used to make the actual physical box is Davy board, or a lot of people call it different names, but it's a material for hardcover books. And I have to measure it all out according to whatever size I want it, and from there I then have to put it together to make sure that it actually opens and closes with no glitches or no funky shifting of the shape or anything like that. And once that's in place, I'm able to then lay it over. It has to be all taped together and opened flat, and I lay it over the book cloth, which is the material that covers the entire piece. And I have to measure it out, and when I'm measuring it, I have to take in consideration leaving at least a 1/4 inch around the perimeter of the object, of the outline of the shape, so that it can fold over and basically make it look like it's really nicely gift wrapped. And once I have that all laid out, and I measure probably like 10 times before I cut, because it takes up a lot of book cloth to do this, and I don't have, extra supplies to quote unquote waste it. So I have to measure it quite often. Once it's all laid out and traced, I cut it. And once it's cut, I have to go back again, and I almost take that piece, like if it's fabric, laying it over like the torso of a person that you're making sure that it fits their specific shoulders and stuff like that. And once I do that, then I start gluing it little by little. So I glue only once. In this case, I glue the center first, which is the square that connects the 2 hexagon pieces. I glue that first, because if I glue it from the center and work my way out, I ensure that it's even and that it all is laying out correctly. And then I just work my way down the line in a way. And then and I have to do that twice in a way, because it's the back side and then the front side. And I want to make sure that all of the creases are folded correctly, that there's no cardboard showing through, and so it has to be really precise. And every time I glue something down, I have to make sure I press it down and let it dry completely before moving on to the next. Otherwise, it can distort the overall kinetics of the box. And then once that's all done, then I move on to the little triangle pieces in terms of doing the drawings and cutting the shapes and covering those again in book cloth. And then from that, I glue them onto the actual hexagon as it's laying flat. And then by then it's all complete, and I can finally open it up and show it off. For this particular one, it's only one pinned insect, which is the bee, and the rest are things that I created using actual material, like plant material, animal material, or wax. I mean, it's like a mixed media. In one of them, there's porcupine needles that my friend gave me like 8 years ago. And I just try to manipulate them in a way where they look like they are insectoid, if that's the word. And so that's one of the parts that I love, because I get to create. So with this whole project, I like to be able to create from my imagination, and not just what I see on the planet, but to bring in whatever creativity I want to bring. And I just create based on the picture, or then I find different materials around my house. Like one of them has cheesecloth, one of them has wax, and different things, and I just put it together until I'm satisfied with the outcome, and then I apply it to the different triangles. So the bug pinning, you want to make sure that your bug, if it's freshly, well, in my case, when I find them, I can tell if they freshly, died or not. And it depends on how stiff they are. So if I'm going to pin it right away, the main thing is you want to make sure that they're flexible. So if the bug itself is too stiff, you have to soak it in water for about 3 minutes, depending on how big the bug is. In this case, the bumblebee, I soaked it in there for about 5 minutes. The water has to be hot, but not too hot, so it doesn't, the bug doesn't dissolve essentially. And you just want to get it to the point where the joints, they do a little crack, and you'll hear it because you pin it, or you put it in the water, put a paper towel on top so that it doesn't float, but it's sunk in the water. And then after your time, you grab it, and you gently, with some pliers, you grab each little leg and you move it gently so that you can hear the pop. Once you hear the pop, then you know it's good to go, and you do that to every little one. And you have to be very careful. And so then once that's done, as it's getting soaked in the water, you prepare your foam, your styrofoam with grid paper on top. I like to use the grid paper that has the smallest size grid measuring, so that way when you're ready to pin your bug, you can see that the legs are spread out evenly. And you have to have different size pins. So the thinner, you have to have really small size pins that are specifically for bug pinning, and they all have a different purpose. There's one that it's bigger, and that one, once your bug is ready to get pinned and you have your styrofoam ready with the graph paper on top, you then grab your bug and you gently set it on top of your styrofoam, and you gently take your main pin, which is the pin that holds it together, and you push it through, all the way through. And you're gonna hear crackling because it's going obviously through the joints. And once you feel that it hits the styrofoam, then you can set it in place of where it's going to be. And you kind of have to work a little bit quickly because these are little bugs, so you don't want them to dry so fast. And so then you start however you want to start, but for me, I like to start with working with the head and working my way back. So I like to first adjust the little like antenna tentacles of the front, then the first pair of legs, second pair of legs, third pair of legs, and then you just let it sit. So depending on the bug again, I like to let mine sit at least for 3 days so that it ensures that they're set in that way. However, you don't have to wait that long depending on your bug. That's what I like to do. And then if for whatever reason one of the legs breaks off, there is some glue that you can use to glue it with little tweezers and all of that stuff. But that's essentially like the general process of the bug. For the other specimens that are not bugs in particular, so once I've done the drawing of whatever drawing I did, I just kind of look at it for a minute and I'm like, okay, well, these are the colors that I want to like kind of highlight, or the texture or the shape. And what I've done in the past is, well, in the past I used to work a lot with wax. So I have wax, and wax is cool because you can add so much stuff to it. Like I've added pepper, I've added flower petals, I've added a lot of things to it. And it's just kind of like a trial and error to see if it gets to what I like. And I've also collected from my grandma's house thorns from, I forget what the plant is, but the thorns were like at least 1 inch long. Or my friend, she's given me stuff. She's given me some porcupine needles. And what I do is I just kind of grab all of those little specimens that I've collected, or I go outside and I just put them on my table and I lay them out. and using wax as my glue to kind of put all these little pieces together, and then adding texture to it through, like I said, either pepper or hemp thread or whatever kind of like I see that it's gonna really emphasize and really match what the drawings are. That's how I go about the process. It's kind of really intuitive, and sometimes there are times where it doesn't work out, so then I break it apart and I do it again, and then I break it apart and I do it again. And even though they're small, maybe like 2 inches or whatever, it's not so much the size, but it's that it feels right and it actually goes and it matches with that particular drawing. And I've even used tea, I've used basically anything you can think about, I've used. In terms of plant matter again, and kitchen things like cheesecloth, or I've even used coffee filters. I've used, so it's really just what I want it to look like and what's going to help me make that outcome. I also use acetate for sealing the boxes. And that part is a little tricky because I have to glue just right there. Otherwise, the glue can seep in here and then it shows through. So that means I have to be very careful. And what I end up doing is I put glue on my palm of my finger and I take my finger and I just dab all the way around and I put it on there. And so that's how that works. The impact that I really hope to bring to anyone that comes across my work is, one, to really appreciate nature more. I feel like as humanity, as a human being on this planet, I observe that there's not too many of us that appreciate nature. We almost take it for granted. So that's my first hope that comes from this. And the other one is to really spark creativity in others, whether it's art itself, like this kind of art, or not, but maybe just something that is creative within them. That's my two really main things. And in terms of like sparking the creativity in them, is kind of going back into the inner child of imagination and really creating from that space. Because when doing this work, there's a lot that goes behind the scenes that, nobody knows everything that I go through in this process. The same goes for any artist. And so taking that moment to kind of appreciate the arts, appreciate that there's also creativity in all of us, and seeing, like, giving a perspective of reciprocity in terms of I'm providing this beautiful, like, creative art so that others can enjoy it, and then that person is enjoying it and appreciating me for having created it, so it's kind of like this circular motion of appreciation and sparking creativity.